Every morning, Emma picked up his small tray of water sachets and snacks, stepped into the scorching Lagos sun, and faced another day of endless hustle. The traffic was a battlefield of blaring horns, impatient drivers, and shouting conductors. The air hung heavy with exhaust fumes, thick enough to taste. For every sachet of pure water he sold, Emma had to weave between moving cars, dodge angry Okada riders, and raise his small voice above the chaos just to be noticed. The city that once seemed like a land of opportunity now felt like a giant machine, cold, loud, and merciless. And in that machine, Emma was just a tiny gear struggling to keep turning. As days turned into weeks, his hope began to fade. His body grew thinner, his clothes hung loose, and the light in his young eyes dimmed to a flicker. Though only 10, he felt centuries older, worn by hunger, exhaustion, and a kind of sadness that had no words. Their life in the abandoned building had also begun to crumble. What once felt like refuge now seemed like a trap. The damp walls smelled of mold, the nights were cold, and the fear of discovery never left them. Every sudden noise made O'Donnell jump, every footstep in the distance made Emma freeze. O'Donnell, too, was fading. Though she had regained her strength after childbirth, her spirit seemed broken. She no longer spoke about the comfortable life she once had, or the man she loved. Those memories were too painful now. Her world had shrunk to two things, her baby and survival. Yet little Chimea was their light. His laughter, his soft eyes, his mother's warmth, he was the one thing that made their dark world glow. But then, just as the rainy season began and the Lagos sky turned grey, tragedy struck. Chimea fell ill. It started with a faint cough but soon grew harsh and painful. His body burned with fever. Mama Bisi, their kind neighbor, brewed herbal medicine from boiled leaves, but it didn't work. The baby's breathing became shallow, his cries grew weak. O'Donnell clutched him against her chest, rocking and praying through tears, while Emma pressed a damp cloth to his forehead and whispered, "You'll be fine, my boy, please, you'll be fine." But the fever only worsened. "He needs a doctor," O'Donnell whispered one night, her voice trembling. "We can't just sit here. He needs medicine." Emma's heart sank. Medicine and doctors belonged to another world, the world of people who had money. His daily earnings could barely buy food, let alone hospital care. He looked at O'Donnell's pale, desperate face and at the dying child between them, and something broke inside him. He was supposed to protect them, but what could a 10-year-old boy do against poverty and fate? That night, as rain poured over the roof and thunder shook the walls, O'Donnell reached for the thin chain around her neck. Hanging from it was a small gold ring, her most precious possession. Emma stared, confused, as she held it tightly in her fist, tears streaming down her face. "We have to sell it," she whispered. He froze. That ring was the last piece of her past, from Chokudi, the man she once loved. "No," Emma said softly. "It's yours. It's the only thing you have left." O'Donnell's voice broke. "It's just metal, Emma. My son's life is worth more than a memory." She took the chain off and pressed the ring into his hand, warm from her skin. "Please," she whispered. "Sell it for him. For us." Emma looked down at the ring, his heart aching. He knew she was right. Memories couldn't save a dying child. "I'll sell it," he murmured. "Tomorrow morning." Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, candlelight flickered over their faces, a mother's sorrow, a boy's silent promise, and a baby's fragile breath. The next morning, Emma and O'Donnell walked through the wet streets toward Tinubu Square, a place Emma had always avoided. It was noisy, crowded, and full of sharp-eyed traders. They walked from shop to shop until they found a small, dimly lit jewelry store. Behind the counter stood a thick-set man with gold rings on every finger. He looked at them with suspicion. Emma placed the ring on the counter and said quietly, "We want to sell this." The man picked it up, examined it under the light, then grunted and named a price far too low. Even Emma knew they were being cheated. No, he protested. It's worth more than that. The man laughed, cold and cruel. Take it or leave it, boy. I don't have all day. Emma looked at O'Donnell, at her tired face, her trembling hands, the sick baby pressed to her chest. He swallowed his pride and nodded. We'll take it. The man smirked, counted out a few wrinkled notes, and pushed them across the counter. As they stepped outside, his mocking laughter followed them into the street. They both knew they'd been robbed, but they also knew it didn't matter. The baby still had a chance. They went straight to a small private clinic tucked behind a busy road. The nurse at the desk looked at them with pity and led them to the doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes. After examining the baby, his face turned grave. It's bronchitis, he said gently. You brought him just in time. A few more days, and it would have been too late. He prescribed medicine and gave them clear instructions. Almost all their money was gone when they left, but in their hearts, hope had returned. That night, in their tiny room, they gave Chimea his first dose. Slowly, his fever began to fall. His breathing eased. O'Donnell sat by his side, her hand over his chest, tears of relief in her eyes. She had sold her past, but she had saved her son, and that was enough. 6 years passed, 6 long years that felt like a lifetime in the unforgiving city of Lagos. Emma had grown from a frightened boy into a strong young man of 16. Chimea, once a dying infant, was now a lively, curious child of 6. Their struggle for survival had turned into a life of quiet dignity. Emma now owned a small wooden kiosk near the bus park, painted in bright colors, where he sold phone credit, snacks, and cold drinks. People called him Small Emma, the boy with the big heart. He was respected, honest, hardworking, and wise beyond his age. Their new home, a small room in a crowded Face Me I Face You compound, was far from luxury, but it was theirs. They had a door with a key, a real mattress, and a stove for O'Donnell to cook warm meals that filled the room with comfort. O'Donnell had changed too. Her eyes, once full of pain, now shone with quiet strength. Each night, after Emma closed his kiosk, their little room turned into a classroom. Under the glow of a small lantern, O'Donnell taught Chimea to read and write, tracing letters on old exercise books. She even taught Emma arithmetic and reading, helping him run his business better. Through her lessons, she gave them something priceless, knowledge and hope. The day they left the tenement yard, the whole neighborhood gathered to watch. Children pointed, women whispered, and men stared in awe as the sleek black Mercedes waited at the gate. O'Donnell, dressed simply but with quiet grace, held her sons close, one by birth, one by love. As the car drove away, rain began to fall softly over Lagos, washing the dust from the streets. And for the first time in a very long while, the future didn't look cruel anymore. It looked bright, like the dawn after a storm. The rain followed them all the way to the island, drumming softly against the windows as the car sped past streets that shimmered under the wet afternoon light. O'Donnell watched in silence, her reflection blurred against the glass. So much had changed, the city, her life, even her heartbeat. Beside her, Chimea stared in wide-eyed wonder at the tall buildings, the flashing lights, the endless cars that moved like streams of silver. Emma sat quietly next to him, his body tense, his mind restless. He had never left the mainland before. Every street light, every honking car, every polished gate looked like a different world, one that didn't belong to him. Mr. Bello glanced at them through the rearview mirror, his expression gentle but thoughtful. "We are almost there," he said softly. "Your father's house is in Ekoi. It's peaceful there." When they finally arrived, the car rolled through a wide iron gate into a compound so large it could have swallowed their old neighborhood whole. The mansion stood tall, white walls gleaming despite the rain, with a garden filled with hibiscus and trimmed hedges shaped like crowns. 2 guards rushed to open the doors, bowing slightly as Mr. Bello led them up the marble steps. The air smelled of rain, flowers, and old wealth. O'Donnell's steps slowed as they entered the living room. Everything felt overwhelming: the polished floors, the chandelier, the quiet hum of air conditioning. It was the first time in years she had felt cold, not from poverty, but from disbelief. For a moment, she hesitated at the doorway, clutching Chimia's hand. A nurse appeared from the hallway. "Madam," she said gently, "he's awake. He's been waiting for you." O'Donnell's breath caught. Her feet moved on their own as she followed the nurse down the long corridor lined with family portraits. At the end of the hall, a large wooden door stood open. Inside, an old man lay on a bed, thin and pale, his hair white as sea foam. When he turned his head and saw her, his eyes, though dimmed by age and pain, widened with recognition. "O'Donnell," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My child." The world seemed to stop. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, then ran to him. "Papa," she cried, her voice breaking as years of buried emotion poured out. She fell to her knees beside his bed, holding his frail hand. "Papa, I thought I'd lost you." The old man's lips quivered. Tears filled his tired eyes. "No, my daughter," he whispered weakly. "It was I who lost you. I let them turn my heart against my own blood. I've lived with that shame every day." O'Donnell shook her head, tears spilling freely. "You don't have to say anything. You're my father. That's all that matters." He smiled faintly, his hand brushing her cheek. Then his gaze shifted to the boy standing quietly by the door. "And who is this young man?" he asked softly. O'Donnell turned to Emma and beckoned him closer. "This is Emma," she said proudly, her voice steady now. "He's the one who saved me when I had nothing. He's my son, my strength." Emma stepped forward shyly, bowing his head. "Good evening, sir." The old man studied him for a long moment, then nodded with quiet respect. "You have your mother's courage," he said to O'Donnell. Then, turning to Emma, he added softly, "and her heart now beats in you." Chimia peeked out from behind his mother, curious and restless. The old man's tired eyes softened even more. "And this little one?" O'Donnell smiled through her tears. "Your grandson." The old man reached out a trembling hand. "Come, my boy." Chimia hesitated, then walked forward, placing his small hand in his grandfather's palm. The old man closed his eyes, whispering something too soft to hear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps gratitude to the heavens. For the first time in years, the house that had once echoed with silence now held the sound of family again. That night, O'Donnell stayed by her father's bedside. They talked until his voice grew weak, speaking of lost years, of the lies that drove them apart, of forgiveness and second chances. Emma sat quietly in the corner, listening, part of the story now, though not by blood but by something stronger, love. In the days that followed, life began to change again. Doctors came and went, servants filled the house with food and care, and for the first time, Emma and Chimia slept in soft beds under clean sheets. O'Donnell began to regain her old grace, not the fragile kind that came from comfort, but the resilient kind that came from surviving. Mr. Bello handled the paperwork discreetly, and soon, O'Donnell officially became the heir to her father's estate. But even with wealth surrounding her, she remained the same woman who once shared stale bread with her son and the boy who saved her. One afternoon, as she stood in the garden watching Chimia chase butterflies, she turned to Emma. "Do you know what I've learned?" she said softly. He shook his head. "That life can take everything from you, your home, your name, your dreams, but if you still have love, you have enough to rebuild it all." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You gave me that love, Emma. You gave me my life back." Emma looked at her, the Lego sun warm on his face, and smiled shyly. "You gave me one too, Mama," he said. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of wealth and the laughter of a child who once almost didn't survive, Odono finally felt whole. The past no longer haunted her, it had shaped her. And though they now lived in a mansion far from the noisy streets of Ajigono, every time she heard the faint sound of traffic in the distance, she whispered a silent prayer for the boy who once braved those roads, not just to sell water, but to keep their hope alive. Of course, here's the continuation of Odono's story, carrying the narrative years forward with the same emotional and Nigerian realism, blending legacy, love, and destiny. Years passed like the slow roll of the Lagos tide. The mansion in Ikoyi became a place of laughter, healing, and quiet strength. Emma grew into a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, his once timid nature now replaced by quiet confidence. He studied hard, first under the care of private tutors, then at the University of Lagos, where he majored in medicine, the same dream Odono once held before life turned its back on her. Odono often watched him from the balcony, her heart swelling with pride. Sometimes she would remember the boy who used to sell sachet water in the sun, calling out, "Pure water, 20 naira." And she would whisper, half to herself, "See what God can do." Chimea, on the other hand, grew restless and curious, more like his grandfather than anyone else. He loved numbers, business, and the thrill of turning small ideas into profit. Before he turned 17, he was already running a small online sneaker business, using part of his school allowance. The same streets that once mocked his mother now bought from her son. But fate, as it always does, was not yet finished with them. It began one quiet morning when Emma came into the sitting room, holding a letter. His face was pale. "Mama," he said slowly, "I got an offer. From a hospital in London. They want me for training, a full scholarship." Odono's heart leapt and then sank. She smiled through the ache rising in her chest. "My son, that's wonderful." He nodded, but his eyes searched hers. "It means I'll have to leave, maybe for a long time." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Go," she said softly. "You must see the world. You must carry our story farther than these walls." That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, they sat together on the veranda. The air smelled of roasted corn and the far-off echo of traffic. Odono turned to him. "Do you remember the day I met you?" Emma smiled faintly. "Under the bridge, Mama. You gave me the only bread you had." She nodded. "And you gave me something I didn't know I had left, faith." He looked away, blinking fast. "I won't forget where I came from. Or who made me who I am." When he left for London 2 weeks later, Odono stood by the gate, waving until the car disappeared down the long road. For the first time since she found her father, she cried again, not from pain, but from pride. 2 years later, Odono's father passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left behind not just wealth, but words, a letter written in his frail hand. "To my daughter, Odono. I wronged you once by trusting others more than your heart. I pray I have made it right in this lifetime. Use what I leave you to heal others, not to become like those who hurt us. Money without mercy is a curse. Your father." Odono built a clinic in his name, the Chike Bello Foundation for Women and Children, in Ajigono, where her own story began. Every corner of the clinic told a piece of her journey, from the rusty gates where she once begged for work, to the bridge where she found Emma, to the room where she first held her son and swore they'd never sleep hungry again. When Emma returned from London, he joined her there. Together, they transformed the clinic into one of the most trusted community centers in Lagos. Mothers came with sick children, young girls came for advice, and the poor came for hope. Sometimes, people would whisper as they passed Odono on the street. "That's the woman who used to sell bread in Ajigono." And someone else would answer, "Yes, but now she feeds a nation." Years rolled on, and Emma grew into a man others looked up to, gentle, brilliant, unshakable. Yet he never married early, not because he lacked admirers, but because no one seemed to carry that same unselfish fire he'd seen in O'Donnell. One day, during a charity event at the clinic, he met a woman named Nena, a young doctor with eyes as kind as her words. She had also known hardship, had also rebuilt herself from the ground. When she smiled, Emma felt something shift, like the beginning of a new chapter written by fate itself. O'Donnell saw it immediately. After the event, she teased him gently. "Your father's spirit is laughing wherever he is. He knows love when he sees it." Emma chuckled, shaking his head. "Mama, not everything is love." She smiled knowingly. "That's what I said once." 25 years later. The world had changed, but Lagos was still the same, restless, loud, full of promise and pain in equal measure. The skyline had grown taller, the roads busier, but under the bridges, life still hummed in the rhythm of survival. In a quiet part of Ikoyi, an old photograph hung in the main hall of the Chike Bello Foundation Hospital. It showed a young woman in a simple Ankara gown, standing beside two boys, one shy, one smiling wide. The caption beneath read, "O'Donnell Bello, the woman who chose mercy." Every morning, people passing through the hospital lobby stopped to look at it. Some whispered, "That's the woman who built this place." Others only stared, feeling something they couldn't quite name, as if the photo itself breathed a kind of strength. Emma was now a man of 50, tall and calm, his hair sprinkled with grey. He was the hospital's chief medical director and a mentor to hundreds of young doctors. His wife, Nena, ran the foundation's outreach program, and their two children, Kamsi and Tob, were the new generation of a story that had begun long before they were born. Kamsi, the elder, was bold and sharp-tongued, with her grandmother's fierce compassion. Tob, quieter but clever, had a habit of asking questions that left adults lost for words. One afternoon, as the rain began to fall softly on the city, Kamsi wandered into the hospital archives. She was working on a school project about the unsung heroes of Lagos and wanted to include her grandmother. She found an old wooden box labeled A. Bello, Personal Files. Inside were faded letters, yellowed photos, and one notebook wrapped in cloth. The first page carried her grandmother's handwriting. "If you ever read this, know that I lived, I fought, and I forgave. The world didn't give me much, but God gave me enough, and that was all I needed." Kamsi's throat tightened. She turned another page. "Never despise your beginning, even if it's under the bridge. Some bridges don't just carry cars, they carry destinies." By the time she finished reading, her tears had stained the paper. She ran down the hallway, bursting into her father's office. "Daddy," she cried, holding up the notebook. "Why didn't you tell me she wrote this?" Emma looked at the book in her hands and smiled softly. "Because I wanted you to find it yourself." She sat across from him, still emotional. She went through so much, and yet she forgave everyone. Even those who hurt her. He nodded. That's why she was great. She didn't let bitterness grow roots in her heart. She turned pain into purpose. Later that evening, as the rain stopped and the sun broke through the clouds, Kamsi gathered a few of her school friends in front of the hospital. She held up her grandmother's photo and said, "This is my hero." She didn't just build a hospital. She built hope. Her classmates clapped, but one of them asked, was she rich? Kamsi smiled. No. She was kind. That's rarer. Months later, on the anniversary of O'Donnell's death, the foundation organized an event called The Woman Who Chose Mercy. The governor came. So did former patients, old neighbors from Ajigana, and even street children who had been saved through the hospital's outreach. A mural of O'Donnell was unveiled, her face rising from painted clouds, one hand reaching down toward a small child. Below it, the words read, "Mercy is not weakness. It is the strength to love in a world that forgot how." As the crowd clapped, Emma stood quietly beside his children. Nena slipped her hand into his, and for a long time they said nothing. The wind carried the scent of hibiscus and wet earth, just like the night O'Donnell had first arrived at the mansion decades ago. Emma whispered, "Mama, you're still here." And in that moment, it truly felt like she was. The rain began again, soft and endless, washing over the streets of Lagos. From the tall towers of Ikoyi to the crowded corners of Ajigona, water flowed through gutters and market stalls, over broken pavements and under bridges, the same bridges that had once sheltered the forgotten. In the quiet courtyard of the Chike Bello Foundation, the night guard stood in silence as thunder rolled across the sky. The statue of O'Donnell glistened under the rain, the water sliding down her bronze face like tears she no longer needed to hide. Inside, the boy who had entered that night slept soundly for the first time in months, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of soap and care. Somewhere in the dark, a nurse whispered a prayer over him, the same one O'Donnell used to say whenever she found a lost soul. "God, let this child find peace where I once found pain." In the city that never stopped moving, her story had become part of the air, told by mothers to their children, painted on school walls, remembered in the laughter of those she healed. O'Donnell was gone, yes, but her mercy had multiplied, in every doctor who treated the poor without charge, in every girl who chose forgiveness instead of revenge, in every child who grew up believing that love could be stronger than hunger. And when dawn came, Lagos woke to another day, loud, chaotic, alive, but somewhere in that morning light, it felt as though the whole city whispered her name. O'Donnell. The woman who turned her wounds into wings. The mother who built hope out of ashes. The bridge that never stopped carrying lives across. And so, our story never truly ended, because mercy, once given, never dies. It only finds another heart to live in. Months passed after O'Donnell's death, yet her presence lingered everywhere, in the soft hum of the clinic she built, in the laughter of children chasing kites across the dusty courtyard, and in the quiet determination that now burned in Emma's heart. Emma had grown into a man whose face carried both youth and history, a face shaped by struggle, yet softened by kindness. The people in the neighborhood no longer called him Small Emma. Now, they called him Dr. Emma, not because of a medical degree, but because he healed in his own way. He ran the clinic O'Donnell had founded, walking beside nurses who adored her memory and teaching street boys how to read, the same way she once taught him. Every morning, before the gates opened, he would pause at the bronze statue in the courtyard. He'd stand before O'Donnell's likeness, her head raised, her arms outstretched as though she were embracing the city, and whisper softly, "I'm keeping my promise, Mama." Then he'd turn to the waiting crowd outside the gate, faces lined with hope and exhaustion, and begin another day. Chomea, now 12, often helped him at the front desk. The same little boy who once lay dying in O'Donnell's arms now carried a stethoscope around his neck, eager to learn. He had his mother's calm eyes and Emma's unbreakable will. One day, he would tell his brother proudly, "I'll be a real doctor. The kind with papers and everything." And Emma would smile, the way O'Donnell used to, proud, tired, full of quiet joy. At night, when the city lights shimmered in the distance and the wind carried the sound of distant music from the bars and buses, Emma would sit by the window of his small office. He'd look out at the skyline and think of how far they had come, from the cracked walls of an abandoned building to this place of light and healing. Sometimes he imagined O'Donnell standing beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her voice soft as rain. "You see, Emma. The machine didn't break you. You became its heartbeat." And in those moments, he would close his eyes, feeling the weight of gratitude more than sorrow. Because though the city of Lagos was still loud, harsh, and unrelenting, Emma had learned what O'Donnell always knew, that even in the cruelest places, love can still grow roots, and hope can still find a home.